The dog's frantic barking tore through the frozen silence of Mountain Ridge. Officer James Parker's hands trembled as his flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the ancient concrete seal, home on 20 years untouched. Luna stood before the rock face, paws bleeding crimson trails across virgin snow. Her amber eyes blazed with something beyond training, beyond instinct. The German shepherd had broken command, abandoned the search grid, and led them 2 miles into forbidden territory. The pneumatic drill shrieked. Dust exploded behind 30 centimeters of century-old cement. A rusted iron door emerged from history's throat. Parker's radio crackled. "We're pulling the plug in 6 hours." Luna didn't wait. She lunged into the void the moment metal groaned open. From somewhere deep inside, a child's weak breath echoed. What they would find in the next 48 hours would shatter 120 years of silence and redefine loyalty forever. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 7 days before Ryan Miller vanished, Mountain Ridge was a town slowly dying beneath winter's grip. The Colorado hamlet of 3,200 souls nestled deep in the Rocky Mountain valleys, where Victorian architecture stood like ghosts of a once prosperous mining era. Snow buried Main Street 2 feet deep, temperatures held at 15 below. 1/3 of the storefronts wore plywood faces, their windows dark and hollow. The Blackwood name appeared everywhere: Blackwood Elementary, Blackwood Memorial Hospital, Blackwood Community Center. 4 generations of that family had owned 40% of the land since the gold rush days. The town didn't just respect them, it worshipped them. Sarah Miller stood at her classroom window, one hand pressed against the cold glass. Stage 4 breast cancer had stolen her hair, her strength, her certainty about tomorrow, but not her resolve. Each morning, she painted on normalcy: the wig, the smell, the steady voice, reading stories to 20 third graders who pretended not to notice how thin she'd become. At home, she held her son Ryan close, memorizing the weight of him, 10 years old, brown curls, missing one front tooth. He drew pictures of dogs and mountains and labeled them "My Hero," always with Officer Parker's K9 Luna. Robert Miller worked late every night. The fluorescent lights of his small law office, his only companions. Bills covered his desk like accusation letters. $320,000 in medical debt, his wife dying, his son watching it all with those 2 knowing eyes. Robert had sold his father's heirloom watch last month. Next, he supposed, would be his integrity. The case on his desk haunted him: a land dispute between private owners and the proposed national park expansion. Simple work, good money, but the opposing party was making it complicated, making it expensive, making it dangerous. Officer James Parker sat alone in his squad car outside the station, snow gathering on the windshield. In his lap lay a weathered file folder marked Emily Carter, missing, not 28 years he'd carried this weight. 28 years since his sister disappeared at age 6. They'd found a body 8 months later, made identifications, held a funeral, but Parker had never stopped looking at the woods with suspicion, never stopped wondering if he'd given up too soon. Luna lay in the back seat, her dark, intelligent eyes watching her handler. The 4-year-old German shepherd bore a small scar beneath her belly, barely visible through thick fur. She'd come to Parker 18 months ago, a stray found half frozen in those same woods. No chip, no collar, no history. Just survival instinct and an uncanny gift for finding the lost. Parker didn't know that Luna had once had a different master. Didn't know she'd been trained for very different purposes. Didn't know that when she looked toward the northern mountains, she was remembering a place of darkness where screams echoed off stone walls. None of them knew they had 72 hours left before everything shattered. The afternoon held no warning of what was coming. Ryan Miller kissed his mother goodbye at 5:30, pulling on his red winter coat while Sarah watched from the couch. Too weak from chemotherapy to stand, her fingers lingered on his hand longer than usual. "Stay on the main road, honey, straight to Tommy's house." "I will. Mom, love you." Sarah pressed her face to the window, watching that splash of red move through the blue twilight until the falling snow erased it completely. Some instinct made her stay there. Hand against cold glass, long after he'd disappeared. Ryan never arrived at Tommy Davidson's house 2 miles away. By 6:15, when Tommy's mother called asking where he was, the temperature had dropped to 12 below zero. Sarah's scream brought neighbors running. Robert Miller's car fish-tailed through darkening streets, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He'd been at the office when Sarah called, her voice broken into pieces. Now his mind spun with possibilities he couldn't bear to name. His phone buzzed an unknown number. He silenced it. Not now. Nothing mattered except finding Ryan. But somewhere in the woods, Ryan had stopped walking. He remembered hearing something, not an animal, not wind, a voice calling his name. He'd turned toward the sound, curious, stepping off the trail into the trees. Then movement behind him. A cloth pressed over his face, chemicals sweet. The world spinning. Darkness. By 7 o'clock, Officer Parker stood in the Miller living room, his training barely containing the flood of memories. 30 years ago, he'd stood in a different living room, listening to his mother's identical cries. Emily's pink jacket. Emily's favorite doll. Emily gone. He radioed dispatch. 10-year-old boy, missing 90 minutes in sub-zero temperatures. I need every available unit and civilian volunteers. Search and rescue protocol 1. And get Luna ready. The town mobilized with desperate speed. By 8 o'clock, 30 volunteers gathered at the community center, their breath forming clouds in the freezing air. They divided into 5 teams, each assigned a sector radiating from Ryan's last known location. Parker stood before a map, marking search grids with shaking hands. Luna waited by the door, her body tense with purpose. Parker brought her Ryan's jacket from the laundry basket. She pressed her nose into the fabric, inhaling deeply. When she looked up, something changed in her eyes, a recognition, a memory, something Parker couldn't read. A paramedic approached with grim statistics. "Officer, at 15 below, a 10-year-old has maybe 24 to 36 hours, less if he's injured or can't find shelter." Parker checked his watch. "Then we have less than 30 hours. Move out." They searched through the night, flashlight beams dancing through falling snow like desperate prayers. Voices called Ryan's name until they went hoarse. Luna pulled Parker north, following some trace the others couldn't detect, but fresh snow kept erasing the trail. At 11:40, they found something. Ryan's footprints appeared briefly in a sheltered spot, then stopped abruptly. No signs of struggle. But beside them, barely visible, were tire tracks. Someone had tried to brush them away with pine branches. Luna smelled the tracks and erupted into furious barking. Parker's blood went cold. This wasn't an accident. Somebody took him. The first search ended near midnight with nothing but questions. Sarah Miller refused to come inside, sitting on the snow-covered porch in her bathrobe, clutching Ryan's baby blanket. Neighbors tried to move her. She wouldn't budge. Robert Miller stood in the garage, alone, staring at his phone. 3 missed calls from that unknown number. Finally, he listened to the voicemail. An old man's voice, calm and precise. "I know where your son is, Mr. Miller, but finding him will cost you everything you have. Check your car." Robert's hands shook as he opened the driver's door. On the seat lay a manila envelope. Inside $500,000 in bearer bonds and a contract dropping his land dispute case. His phone lit up with a text. "Sign it. Bury the case. Your son comes home in 3 days. Tell anyone. He dies in that hole. Choose." As Robert Miller stood in his garage at midnight, holding his son's life in one hand and his soul in the other. The choice he made would haunt him forever. His signature went on the paper. The bonds went in his safe, and he told no one. The longest night of Sarah Miller's life had just begun. But she didn't know that 3 more nights of hell were still to come. 24 hours missing? The number hung over Mountain Ridge like a death sentence. Sarah Miller hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't moved from the living room window. Her body trembled with exhaustion, and something worse, the feeling of her son slipping further away with each passing minute. Friends brought food that went untouched. She could only whisper the same words over and over. "When he comes home, he'll be hungry." Robert disappeared for hours that morning, offering no explanation. When he returned, his eyes couldn't meet his wife's. He mumbled something about checking with his office contacts, making calls. Sarah was too numb to question the lie in his voice. In the darkness of his prison, Ryan Miller scratched words into stone with a piece of loose rock. His fingers bled, but he kept going. "Day 1. Mom, I'm cold." The effort exhausted him. He curled against the damp wall, shivering so hard his teeth chattered. The cold was eating him from the inside. His body temperature had dropped from 97 to 96 degrees. Above ground, 50 volunteers expanded the search radius to 10 miles. Drones flew grid patterns, their cameras scanning endless white wilderness. Luna kept pulling Parker northwest, toward a wall of vertical cliffs they'd marked as impassable. The dog wouldn't give up that direction, straining at her harness until her neck bled from the collar. "Luna's never wrong," Parker told his team. "But there's nothing up there, just rock face." At noon, Mayor Harold Whitmore arrived at the command center, a dignified man of 60 with silver hair and expensive boots. He carried the weight of civic responsibility like a crown. He gathered the search leaders with grave news. "Our SAR budget allows 72 hours maximum. After that, we transfer to FBI and close local operations. We've already spent $50,000. The hospital needs funding. The school needs repairs. I'm sorry, but we have to be realistic." The word spread through the volunteer ranks like poison. Some people started talking loud enough for Sarah to hear through her window. $50,000 for one kid, that's property taxes, that's everyone's money. How long do we keep this up? Sarah heard them. She tried to stand, to defend her son. But her legs gave out. She collapsed on the hardwood floor, her wig sliding off, revealing her bald, scarred scalp. The sight silenced the complainers. But the damage was done. The town was dividing into factions, those who believed and those who'd already begun grieving. Parker sat in his truck as sunset bled across the snow. The file on Emily lay open in his lap. He'd failed her, given up searching after 8 months, accepted the body they'd found, buried the wrong child while his real sister remained missing, and now Ryan was slipping away on his watch. His hand moved to his service weapon. The cold metal felt like absolution. One pull, and the guilt would end. Emily's face haunted him. Ryan's face haunted him. All the lost children he couldn't save. A bark outside the window made him jump. Luna stood in the snow, staring at him through the glass. She barked again, sharper, then scratched at the door. Parker opened it, and she lunged inside, putting her paws on his chest, licking his face with desperate insistence. "I can't do this anymore, girl," he whispered. "I keep failing them." Luna whined and grabbed his sleeve in her teeth, pulling. 48 hours missing. Dawn came gray and merciless. Medical experts revised their estimates downward. In this cold, with inadequate shelter, we're looking at critical hypothermia by hour 60. After that, survival rates dropped to single digits. Sarah Miller was rushed to intensive care that morning. Her blood pressure had spiked dangerously, her heart showing irregular rhythms. The oncologist pulled Robert aside with brutal honesty. "The stress is accelerating the cancer's spread. She needs to rest or she'll die before we find your son." On the ambulance stretcher, Sarah gripped Robert's hand. "Promise me. Promise you'll find him even if I'm gone." Robert nodded, unable to speak, unable to confess that he'd already traded their son's rescue for money and silence. The guilt was crushing him. In the sealed mine shaft, Ryan had stopped crying. There were no tears left. He scratched his second message, day 2. "Is anyone looking?" His hands shook too much to write more. Then he heard it, the scrape of metal on metal. The door opening. Light blinded him. A figure stepped inside, elderly and methodical, carrying a plastic bottle and a sandwich in a paper bag. Harold Whitmore's voice was almost kind. "Eat, boy. You need your strength. This is your home now." Ryan's voice came out as a rasp. "Why?" "Because your father took something that belonged to my family, land that's been ours for 4 generations. And now I'm taking something of his. Fair is fair." Whitmore left the food and departed, locking the door behind him. Ryan understood then this wasn't random. This was revenge. And revenge didn't end quickly. By dusk, only 20 volunteers remained. The predicted blizzard was approaching, due to hit in 12 hours. Any evidence, any tracks, any hope would be buried under 3 feet of snow. FBI agents were already en route to assume control. Parker begged for one more day. "Just 24 hours, please." The answer came back cold. 72 hours is policy. We've done our duty, officer," that night. As Sarah lay semi-conscious in the hospital, her heart monitor showed an alarming dip. Nurses rushed in for 15 seconds. Her heart stopped beating entirely. They shocked her back, but when she opened her eyes, something in her had changed. She looked like someone who'd already made peace with death. Robert sat outside her room, staring at his phone. The unknown number had texted again. "Good boy, keep quiet. 72 hours and he walks out alive. Tell the cops, tell anyone, and I bury him in that blizzard where nobody will ever find him." Robert put his head in his hands. He'd chosen money over morality, silence over his son, and now he had to live with watching everyone search in vain while he alone knew the truth. Parker drove to the cliff face one more time in the darkness. Luna rode beside him, her eyes fixed on the mountains. When they arrived, she jumped out before he could stop her, running to the rock wall, barking at stone that revealed nothing. "There's nothing there, girl. There's never been anything there." But Luna wouldn't stop. She clawed at the rock until her paws bled fresh. And somewhere, deep behind 30 feet of stone and 120 years of secrets, Ryan Miller heard her in his delirium. He thought he was dreaming, but he scratched one more message. "Day 2. I hear her. Luna's coming." The second night ended with 3 souls standing at the edge of the abyss. A mother dying in a hospital bed, a father living in lies, and a boy losing hope in the dark. But one creature and one loyal, relentless soul still hadn't given up. 72 hours. The deadline arrived with the pale dawn of day 3. Officer Parker stood before his map one final time, tracing the sectors they'd searched, the ground they'd covered, the hope they'd lost. FB agents would arrive by noon to formally assume jurisdiction. After that, he'd be sidelined, another failed rescue added to his lifetime of guilt. He knelt before Luna in the equipment room. The German shepherd looked exhausted, her paws wrapped in makeshift bandages, her ribs showing through her coat. She hadn't eaten in 48 hours. "Girl, I know you're tired. I know I'm asking the impossible, but if there's anything, any scent, any instinct you can feel, please, one more time." Luna stared into his eyes with an intensity that seemed almost human. Then she stood, shook herself from nose to tail, and walked to the door. "Ready?" 15 volunteers remained the faithful, the stubborn, the ones who couldn't live with themselves if they quit. They gathered in the pre-dawn cold, breath steaming, hope nearly extinguished. Robert Miller stood among them, hollow-eyed, saying nothing. They divided into 3 groups. Luna chose northwest again, the same direction she'd insisted on from the beginning. Parker decided to trust her completely this time, to follow wherever she led, even if it made no tactical sense. At 6 o'clock, they moved into the woods. Snow crunched beneath boots. The temperature hovered at 8 below. Somewhere in the distance, a weather alert siren began its warning wail. The blizzard was accelerating, expected by early afternoon instead of evening. Whatever window remained was closing fast. Luna moved with purpose now, not following a visible trail, but responding to something else entirely. Her muzzle lifted, testing the air. Parker had seen tracking dogs work for 28 years. But this was different. She wasn't following Ryan's scent from 3 days ago. She was detecting something current, something present. Fear has a smell. Scientists had proven it. The hormone cortisol, released in human sweat during terror, creates a distinct chemical signature, and German shepherds, with their 220 million scent receptors, can detect it across vast distances. Luna wasn't tracking where Ryan had been. She was tracking where his fear was radiating from right now. She broke into a run. "Luna, heel!" Parker commanded. The dog ignored him, something she'd never done in 18 months of partnership. She crashed through underbrush, leaped over fallen logs, her injured paws leaving blood spots on the snow. "Follow her," Parker shouted. "Trust the dog." They ran behind her, stumbling through terrain they'd marked as unsearchable. 2 miles of brutal wilderness, crossing a frozen creek that cracked ominously under their weight, climbing through pine forest so dense it blocked the sky. Robert Miller ran like a man possessed, because he knew where this direction led. Toward the old Blackwood mining claims, toward land his family had owned for generations, toward a place that should have been forgotten. At 8:15, Luna stopped. They'd reached a sheer rock face, 30 feet of vertical stone covered in moss and ice. There was nothing here, no cave opening, no mine entrance, no explanation for the dog's obsession. But Luna was barking not the measured, alert bark of detection, but something primal and desperate. She threw herself at the rock, clawing until her bandages shredded and fresh blood painted the stone. Parker approached, confusion warring with instinct. His glove brushed across the rock face, clearing away ice and lichen. Beneath, he felt something unnatural, smooth, man-made. Clear the snow. All of it. They worked frantically, brushing away decades of accumulated debris. The surface emerged concrete, ancient and crumbling, but definitely concrete. And there, faint but visible, were carved markings 1905 and a symbol of crossed pickaxes. This is a sealed mine shaft. Parker breathed. This whole face is cement over the entrance. Robert Miller saw it, and the blood drained from his face. No, God, no. We need to leave, right now. What? Why? But Robert was already backing away, shaking his head violently. You don't understand what we have to go. A volunteer grabbed his arm. Do you know something about this place? Robert tore free and ran, fleeing down the mountain like demons were chasing him. The others watched in stunned confusion. Parker made the decision. Get me a rescue team with drilling equipment. We're opening this. The call went out. By 9:30, a crew arrived with pneumatic drills and cutting torches. FBI agents called Parker's radio, demanding he stand down and wait for federal authority. Parker switched off his radio and gave the order to begin. The drill bit into century-old cement. The sound echoed across the valley, a scream of metal against stone, of present violating past, of secrets about to spill. Luna sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the rock face, waiting. Dust exploded in clouds. The concrete was 30 centimeters thick, reinforced with iron bars that had to be cut through individually. 45 minutes passed. In the hospital, Sarah Miller suddenly sat upright in her bed, startling the nurses. They found him, she whispered. I can feel it. They found my boy. At 10:47, the last section of concrete cracked and fell away. Behind it stood an iron door, rust-eaten but intact, secured with chains wrapped around the handles and padlocked from the outside. Someone had sealed this place and meant for it to stay sealed forever. Parker cut through the chains with bolt cutters. The lock fell away. He gripped the door handle, looked back at his team, and pulled. The hinges shrieked. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of dampness, mold, and something worse, human waste. Fear, sweat, suffering. Somewhere in that darkness, a child was breathing. Luna didn't wait for permission. She bolted through the opening and vanished into the black throat of the mountain. 5 seconds later, her joyful barking echoed from deep inside. Parker clicked on his flashlight and stepped across the threshold. His beam cut through darkness that hadn't seen light in 120 years. The tunnel stretched 50 meters into the mountain. Rail tracks rusted to nothing, support beams rotting to fragments. And on the walls, carved into stone by desperate hands across decades, were names, dates, pleas for help. Sarah J., 1952, help me. Tommy, Mom, I'm scared. Jessica, 18, God please. Parker's light trembled. How many children, Jesus Christ? How many? Luna's barking grew louder, more insistent. Parker moved in deeper, his team following in horrified silence. Side chambers appeared, each with iron doors hanging open. Inside were remnants of lives, a rusted lunch tin, a doll missing its head, a child's shoe. And then, in the last chamber, Luna stood over a small figure curled against the wall. Ryan Miller looked up as the light found him. His lips were blue, his skin gray, his eyes unfocused, but he was breathing. He was alive. Parker dropped to his knees, gathering the boy into his arms. Ryan, son, you're safe now. You're safe. Ryan's voice came out as a croak. Officer Parker, is this real? It's real. I've got you. Luna found you. The dog was there then, licking Ryan's face, whining with relief. The boy wrapped his arms around her neck and began to sob great heaving gasps that shook his entire body. I knew you'd come. Luna told me, in my dreams. She kept saying, hold on. They wrapped him in thermal blankets and called for a medical evacuation. While they waited, the team explored further. They found a rusted metal box containing personal effects, ID badges, toys, clothing each tagged with a year between 1952 and 2010. 14 children, 14 families who'd never known the truth. And they found a ledger, handwritten in careful script, listing names, dates, and reasons. Payment for trespass, revenge for testimony, silence required. Every entry connected back to one name, Blackwood, at 11:30. A helicopter lifted Ryan Miller toward the hospital where his mother waited. Luna sat beside him on the floor, refusing to leave. Parker watched them go, then turned back to the mine entrance. The tunnel went deeper. His team wanted to continue exploring, but Parker stopped them. Not yet. Get the boy to safety first. We'll come back with a full forensics team. But Luna stood at the threshold of a second passage leading further into the mountain. She barked once, sharp and warning, as if to say, there's more. There's so much more you haven't found. By noon, news had spread across Mountain Ridge like wildfire. Ryan Miller was alive. The miracle rescue. 200 people gathered outside the hospital, crying, praying, celebrating. News vans converged from 3 states. But Parker didn't join the celebration. He stood at the mine entrance, staring into the darkness, and felt a cold certainty settle in his bones. They'd found Ryan. They'd saved one life. But they'd also opened something vast and terrible, a wound that had been festering beneath their town for over a century. The boy was safe. The truth, however, had only begun to emerge, and it would demand a reckoning from everyone. The helicopter touched down at Mountain Ridge Memorial Hospital at 12:30. Ryan Miller, wrapped in silver thermal blankets, was rushed through sliding doors that exhaled warmth and antiseptic air. Luna followed despite protocols, and no one had the heart to stop her. The German shepherd's paws left bloody prints on the white tile floor. Sarah Miller was conscious when they wheeled Ryan into her ICU room. The moment she saw him, something broke and mended simultaneously in her chest. She tried to speak but could only weep, reaching out with trembling hands. Ryan climbed onto her bed despite the nurse's protests, and they held each other, this dying woman and her returned son, as if their embrace alone could heal everything that had shattered. "Mom," Ryan whispered, "I knew you were waiting. I couldn't give up because you were waiting." Sarah's tears soaked into his hair. My beautiful brave boy." Robert Miller stood in the doorway, unable to enter. He watched his family reunite, watched his son alive and his wife transformed by joy. And the weight of his betrayal crushed him. His hands shook, sweat ran down his spine despite the cold. Sarah looked toward him, her face radiant. "You found him? Thank you. Thank you for not giving up." Robert's smile was a grotesque mask. He nodded, unable to form words, unable to confess that he'd known for 3 days where Ryan was, that he'd taken money to stay silent, that he'd gambled their son's life on a kidnapper's promise. Parker watched from the hallway, studying Robert's body language. The man looked like someone at a funeral, not a reunion. Something was wrong. The ledger's final entry burned in Parker's memory. Ryan Miller, payment for Robert Miller's betrayal. What betrayal? What had Robert done while the Miller family held their fragile peace? FBI forensic teams descended into the mine. What they found in the next 6 hours would transform a rescue operation into a murder investigation spanning 7 decades. The main tunnel extended 50 meters, but side chambers branched off like the fingers of a grasping hand. In each chamber, investigators found iron doors with exterior locks, prison cells carved from living rock. 4 chambers held skeletal remains, victims the earth had kept secret for generations. The forensics team worked with reverent horror, photographing, documenting, and cataloging the dead. Initial examinations suggested the remains dated from the 90s through the early 2000s. Dental records and DNA testing would take weeks, but preliminary matches to cold case were already emerging. 12 children, ranging from ages 6 to 15, 12 families who'd spent decades wondering, grieving, hoping. In the deepest chamber, they found Jessica Morrison. She'd been 16 when she vanished in 1980, walking home from a friend's house on a summer evening. For 36 years, her mother had kept her bedroom unchanged, waiting. Now they knew why Jessica never came home. The evidence box yielded its secrets slowly. Badges, clothing, toys, each a life interrupted, a future stolen. But it was the documents that truly damned the Blackwood family. Legal papers going back to 1900 detailing land acquisitions that followed suspicious disappearances, mining claims filed days after the previous owners vanished, property transfers signed under duress or by suddenly compliant widows. The ledger was worse. 4 different hands had written in it across the decades, but the methodology remained consistent. The Blackwood family had discovered a simple truth. People who feared for their children's lives would sign anything, surrender anything, remain silent about anything. Jeremiah Blackwood had started it in 1900. 3 miners discovered gold deposits on land they believed was public territory. Jeremiah knew differently. He'd bought the land through proxy purchases and forged documents. When the miners protested, he killed them and sealed their bodies in this mine. Then he took their children one by one and used them as leverage to force the widows to leave town without making accusations. The tradition continued through his son, his grandson, his great-grandson. 4 generations of Blackwood men using this place as their private dungeon, their negotiation tool, their instrument of control. Anyone who challenged their land claims, their business practices, their authority, their children disappeared. The families were given a choice: accept the loss and keep silent, or fight and lose everything. Mountain Ridge had been built on buried bodies and enforced silence. By mid-afternoon, FBI agents brought Parker a critical discovery surveillance photos from a camera near the sealed mine entrance. The device was recent, installed within the past year. It had captured Robert Miller meeting with an elderly man 3 days prior at dawn in the forest near this very location. The two men shook hands. An envelope changed hands. Papers were signed on the hood of a car. Parker studied the elderly man's face. He knew that face. Everyone in Mountain Ridge knew that face. Harold Whitmore, the beloved mayor, philanthropist, benefactor of schools and hospitals, the man whose family had supposedly changed their name from Blackwood in the 1960s to distance themselves from their mining past. "Get me Robert Miller," Parker ordered. "Right now." The FBI found Robert in the hospital cafeteria, staring at cold coffee. They brought him to an interview room where Parker and 2 federal agents waited. Robert looked like a man who'd been expecting this moment, dreading it, unable to prevent it. They laid out the photos. Robert's face crumbled. "You met with Harold Whitmore the morning after your son disappeared. You took an envelope containing $500,000 in bearer bonds. You signed documents dropping your land dispute case. You did all this while your wife was in the hospital, and your son was locked in a hole in the ground?" Robert's voice came out broken. "He said Ryan would be released in 3 days if I cooperated. He said if I told anyone, he'd leave Ryan in that mine to die in the blizzard. I didn't have a choice." "You had every choice," Parker said, his voice shaking with rage. "You chose money over your son's life. You chose silence while 200 people searched in the freezing cold. Luna nearly died finding Ryan. Your wife's heart stopped from the stress, and you knew the whole time. I thought he'd keep his word, I thought. You thought wrong. Harold Whitmore is the great-grandson of Jeremiah Blackwood. His family has been kidnapping and murdering children for 120 years, and you made a deal with him?" The words hung in the air like poison. Robert put his head on the table and sobbed. "I was trying to save my family. We were drowning in debt. Sarah was dying. I thought I could solve everything at once, save Ryan and clear our debts and get rich in the process." An FBI agent finished. $200,000 left over after your debts. A nice profit for selling out your son. The interrogation continued, but Parker couldn't stomach any more. He walked out into the hospital corridor, where media had gathered like locusts. Cameras and microphones and shouted questions, creating a chaos of light and noise. The story was already leaking. By evening, it would be everywhere. Father made deal with kidnapper for $500,000. The headlines wrote themselves. In her hospital room, Sarah Miller watched the news on muted television. Her face, already pale from cancer, went ghostly. She read her husband's name, saw the photos, understood what he'd done. Her hand moved to her chest where her heart had stopped just hours ago. Now it felt like it was stopping again, but this time from betrayal rather than stress. Ryan sat beside her, holding her hand, not understanding why his mother had started crying again, why the good news of his rescue had turned into something terrible. Parker stood outside the mine entrance as sunset painted the snow. Crimson, Luna sat beside him, her bandaged paws leaving her unable to walk without limping. They'd saved Ryan Miller. They'd uncovered 120 years of horror, but Parker felt no triumph, only a vast and terrible sadness. His radio crackled. "Officer Parker, we need you back in the mine. There's something else down here, something we almost missed." He descended into the earth one more time. Deep in the system, past the main chambers, a forensics technician stood before a section of wall that looked slightly different from the rest. The mortar was newer, less weathered. Parker helped them carefully remove stones, revealing not another chamber, but a crawl space leading further into the mountain. "There's another section," the technician said. "Deeper, older. This mine system is bigger than we thought." Parker aimed his flashlight into the narrow passage. The beam disappeared into darkness that seemed to swallow light. Luna, despite her injuries, moved to the entrance and whined not in eagerness, but in warning. As if to say, "Be careful what you find down there. They would explore it tomorrow, with proper equipment and full teams. Tonight, Parker needed to think, to process, to understand how a century of evil had hidden beneath the streets and smiles of his hometown. By midnight, the story had gone viral. National news picked it up. International media followed. Mountain Ridge, the quiet mountain town, became infamous. Reporters camped outside the hospital, the police station, the mine entrance. They interviewed anyone with a camera-ready opinion. Some defended Robert Miller. He was desperate. His wife was dying. He was trying to save his family. Others crucified him. He had knowingly left his son in a dungeon while taking blood money. The town fractured along moral lines. Sarah Miller made her decision while the nurses changed her IV. She called her lawyer, not her husband, and requested divorce papers. When Robert tried to enter her room that night, security turned him away. She'd left instructions she never wanted to see him again. Ryan, lying in a pediatric recovery room with Luna curled at the foot of his bed, stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how his father could have known where he was and done nothing. The betrayal was worse than the captivity. At least Harold Whitmore had been honest about his cruelty. Parker sat alone in his office. The file on Emily Carter opened before him once more. For 30 years, he'd believed they'd found her. For 30 years, he'd carried guilt for not searching longer. Now, he wondered if the Blackwood family had been taking children for generations, if they'd been sealing them in that mine, if they'd been expert at making bodies disappear. Could Emily's case have been mistaken too? Could his sister, like Ryan, have survived somewhere in those dark tunnels? The question wouldn't let him sleep. And tomorrow, when they ventured deeper into the mine, he'd be the first one through that narrow passage. Because if there was even the smallest chance Emily was still alive somewhere in that darkness, James Parker would tear apart mountains with his bare hands to find her. The boy was saved. But the truth had fractured a family, exposed a town's darkest secrets, and opened questions that no one was prepared to answer. The rescue was over. The real horror was just beginning. The morning after Ryan's rescue should have been about celebration, about gratitude, about platoon-breathing relief. Instead, Mountain Ridge woke to scandal that spread like poison through winter air. The surveillance footage aired on national news at 6 o'clock. Someone in the FBI had leaked it, perhaps out of disgust, perhaps for justice, perhaps just for the spectacle. America watched Robert Miller shake hands with Harold Whitmore in the forest dawn, watched the envelope exchange, watched him sign papers on a car hood, while his son shivered in darkness 30 feet below the frozen earth. The caption scrolled beneath in merciless clarity. Father accepted $500,000 from kidnapper, while son held captive. By 7, a mob had gathered outside the Miller house. Someone threw a rock through the living room window. Someone else spray-painted "Traitor" across the garage door in letters 3 feet high. Police had to form a barrier to prevent the crowd from breaking down the front door. Sarah Miller watched from her hospital bed, her hand over her mouth, her body shaking. The nurse tried to turn off the television, but Sarah stopped her. "No, I need to see. I need to know what my husband really is." Robert sat in a holding cell at the county jail, charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy. The federal prosecutor was considering adding child endangerment. He'd been offered a phone call but couldn't think of anyone to ring. His wife wouldn't speak to him. His colleagues had abandoned him. His name had become synonymous with the worst kind of betrayal. Officer Parker arrived at the jail at 8 o'clock, overriding objections from the FBI agents who wanted exclusive access. He stood outside Robert's cell, hands gripping the bars, rage and disgust warring in his chest. "I spent 72 hours without sleep searching for your son. Luna ran until her paws bled. Your wife nearly died from the stress. 200 volunteers froze in the woods, calling Ryan's name until they had no voice left. And you knew where he was the entire time." Robert couldn't meet his eyes. "I was trying to protect my family. The debt was crushing us. Sarah needed treatment. Whitmore promised." "Whitmore's family has been killing children for a century, and you believed him." "I had no choice." Parker's voice dropped to something colder than the winter outside. "We always have a choice. You chose money. You chose to stay silent. You chose yourself over your son." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Ryan's asking why you didn't save him." "What should I tell him?" Robert had no answer. Parker walked away, leaving the man to sit with his shame. The FBI interrogation of Robert continued through the morning, extracting every detail. The initial contact had come 2 weeks prior, an anonymous letter suggesting Robert's land dispute case could be resolved profitably if he was willing to negotiate privately. Robert had dismissed it until Ryan disappeared. Then the phone call came, calm and precise, offering the devil's bargain. "He knew everything about us," Robert confessed. "Our debts, Sarah's prognosis, my desperation. He knew exactly what buttons to push." The agent showed him the ledger entry. "Ryan Miller. Payment for Robert Miller's betrayal." What betrayal? They demanded. "What did you betray before your son was taken?" Robert's confession came in broken pieces. 6 months earlier, he'd been approached by federal investigators looking into land fraud connected to the proposed national park expansion. They'd found irregularities in property transfers dating back decades, all tied to the Blackwood family. Robert was asked to review the documents with his legal expertise and testify, if needed. He'd refused. The Blackwood Whitmore family was too powerful, too connected. Testifying would be professional suicide in a small town where they owned 40% of everything. Robert had declined to cooperate, and the federal investigation had stalled. That was the betrayal. Whitmore referenced not Robert's cooperation, but his silence when justice needed a voice. Ryan's kidnapping was punishment and leverage combined. T'balmimpus, a lesson about what happened to those who might have challenged the family's interests, and insurance that Robert would never cooperate with any investigation. So my son was taken because I was a coward 6 months ago. Robert's voice was hollow. Because I chose my career over doing what was right. The FBI agents had no comfort to offer. The truth was exactly that simple and that damning. While Robert sat with his cascading failures, forensic teams made a discovery that shifted the entire investigation into darker territory. The narrow passage Parker had found the previous evening led to a 6th chamber, hidden behind false walls and accessible only by crawling. This chamber was different from the others, better maintained, recently used, stocked with supplies. And it wasn't empty. At 10 o'clock, Parker received the radio call that would haunt him forever. "Officer, you need to come down here, now, and prepare yourself." He descended into the mine with his heart hammering, deep in the mountain's belly, past the chambers of the dead. Through the crawls of paste that scraped his shoulders, he emerged into a space lit by FBI floodlights. A mattress lay on the floor, blankets, bottles of water, canned food, signs of long-term habitation. And against the far wall, a woman sat huddled, her arms wrapped around 2 children. The woman was perhaps 45, but looked 60. Her hair hung long and gray, her skin pale as underground things, her body skeletal from decades of inadequate nutrition. But her eyes, Parker knew those eyes. He'd seen them every day for 12 years of his childhood. He'd seen them in photographs he'd kept for 30 years. He'd seen them in his dreams and nightmares. His voice came out as a broken whisper. "Emily." The woman's head lifted slowly. She squinted at the light as if it caused physical pain. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged at first. Vocal cords atrophied from decades of disuse. Finally, a croak, "Jimmy." Parker's legs gave out. He fell to his knees, unable to breathe, unable to process what he was seeing. His sister, his baby sister who'd disappeared at age 6, who'd been declared dead after they found remains in the woods, who'd been buried and mourned and remembered as lost. She was alive. She'd been alive this entire time. 30 years in this hole. He crawled toward her, hands shaking, tears streaming down his face. God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I stopped looking. I thought you were dead. They found a body and we buried. I should have kept searching. I should have." Emily reached out with a trembling hand and touched his face, as if confirming he was real. "You came. I knew you would come." The 2 children pressed against her were teenagers, but small for their age, malnourished and terrified. A girl, perhaps 12, and a boy, perhaps 14, with their mother's features and eyes that had never seen the sun. They wore clothing too large, scavenged from old supplies. They shrank from the FBI agents and the lights, having known no human contact except their captor and their mother. Parker understood before anyone spoke. The rage that filled him was beyond words, beyond law, beyond civilized response. Harold Whitmore hadn't just imprisoned Emily. He'd raped her repeatedly over 3 decades. These children were the product of that sustained horror. An FBI agent knelt beside Emily, speaking gently. "Ma'am, you're safe now. Can you tell us your name?" Emily's voice was barely audible. "Emily Carter, born 1989, taken 1995. This is hope and light. My children, don't hurt them." The boy, Light, positioned himself between his mother and the agents, despite being frail as paper. His voice cracked with disuse and puberty combined. "Leave Mama alone. Don't hurt Mama." "We're not going to hurt anyone," Parker managed through his tears. "We're here to help. I'm your uncle. Light, I'm your mother's brother. I'm family." The concept seemed foreign to children who'd known only one room, one tormentor, one narrow definition of existence. They'd been born in this chamber, had never seen the sky, never felt rain, never known the world extended beyond stone walls. Their entire reality was darkness, fear, and their mother's desperate love trying to make a life in hell. Medical teams were called. The extraction took hours because Emily and her children couldn't walk. Their muscles had atrophied from confinement, their bones weakened from lack of sunlight and nutrition. They had to be carried out on stretchers, wrapped in blankets, their eyes covered because the winter brightness, even filtered through cloud cover, was unbearable. Emily kept asking, "Is this real? Am I dying? Is this what dying is?" Parker held her hand during the entire journey up from the mine. "It's real, Em. You're alive. You're free. I've got you now. I'm never letting you go again." When they emerged from the mine entrance, Emily looked up at the sky, clouds moving, wind stirring pine branches, the vast openness of the world. She wept. I forgot it was so big." The hope, the 12-year-old girl who'd never known anything but underground captivity, whispered to her mother, "Is that the sky? The one you told me about?" "Yes, baby, that's the sky. It's so beautiful, it hurts." The revelation hit the media within the hour. If Ryan Miller's rescue had been national news, Emily Carter's discovery was international. The woman who'd been missing for 30 years, declared dead, mourned, and buried alive. And not just alive, but a mother to children born in captivity, a survivor of unconscionable sustained torture. Mountain Ridge didn't just fracture, it exploded. The implications were too vast, too horrible. How many other chambers might exist? How many other victims might still be alive? How deep did the Blackwood family's crimes go? FBI agents raided Harold Whitmore's mansion at noon. They found him in his study, surrounded by ledgers and photographs and trophies from 70 years of terror. He didn't resist arrest. He simply smiled, as if he'd been expecting this day, perhaps even looking forward to it. "You have no idea how far back this goes," he told the agents. "You found one mine. There are others. My great-grandfather started something that became tradition, that became legacy. We weren't monsters. We were preserving what was ours, protecting our family's interests." They found his collection photographs of victims taken with their families at public events. The tormentor standing beside the searched for, hidden in plain sight. Harold at a candlelight vigil for Emily Carter in 1996. Standing 3 feet from Parker, offering condolences, while knowing exactly where the girl was. Harold shaking hands with Jessica Morrison's mother at a fundraiser, wearing a concerned face while her daughter rotted in his family's mind. Decades of sadism documented in careful albums. The trial would take years. The excavation of the mine would take months. But that day, one fact became crystal clear. To everyone in Mountain Ridge, they'd been living on top of an industrial-scale torture operation for 4 generations, and they'd celebrated the perpetrators as their town's finest citizens. Sarah Miller filed for divorce from her hospital bed that afternoon, signing papers with a trembling hand. When reporters asked for comment, she said only, "I'm grateful my son is alive, but I can't forgive someone who would let him suffer to save money. Whatever happens to my ex-husband, it's less than he deserves." Ryan heard about his father's arrest from a nurse who didn't realize the boy could hear through the door. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He simply turned his face to the wall where Luna lay beside him and whispered, "Did Dad ever love me? Was it all fake?" Luna licked his hand, which was the only answer she could give, but it was enough. Ryan fell asleep holding on to her, understanding that love came in many forms, and sometimes the most faithful came on 4 legs. Parker sat in the hospital corridor between his sister's room and Ryan's, his head in his hands, trying to process 30 years of grief and guilt that had suddenly been reframed. He'd spent 3 decades blaming himself for Emily's death. Now he had to reckon with 30 years of her suffering while he lived in freedom, never knowing, never finding her. An FBI psychologist sat beside him. "You couldn't have known. They faked her death. They buried someone else. You had every reason to believe she was gone." "But I stopped looking. I accepted the body. I moved on with my life while she—" "You were a child yourself, 13 years old. This wasn't your failure. This was the failure of every system that should have protected her." But Parker couldn't release the guilt so easily. It had been his companion for too long. Now it simply transformed from grief over death to shame over not searching hard enough for life. As darkness fell over Mountain Ridge, the town sat in collective shock. The evening news showed footage of Emily and her children being transported to a specialized medical facility equipped to handle their unique trauma. Showed Harold Whitmore led away in handcuffs, still smiling that horrible knowing smile. Showed Robert Miller's mugshot, his eyes hollow and dead. And they showed Luna, the German shepherd who'd found Ryan when everyone else had given up, who'd led them to the mine that revealed everything. The network called her a hero. They called her a miracle. They couldn't know that Luna herself had once been a prisoner in that same mine, taken as a puppy by Harold Whitmore, trained to track his escaped victims until she'd finally broken free and found Parker in those woods 18 months ago. Luna carried her own scars, physical and psychological. But unlike the human survivors, she'd found a way to transform her trauma into purpose, her pain into rescue. In the end, she'd used everything Whitmore taught her: tracking, perseverance, survival to destroy him. The family was reunited but broken. The boy was saved but traumatized. The sister was found, but decades too late. The truth was exposed, but at a cost that would take generations to fully comprehend. This wasn't a happy ending. It was barely an ending at all. It was simply the moment when the damage stopped accumulating and the long, painful work of healing could finally begin. The forensic excavation of the mine continued for 6 days. After Emily Carter's rescue, what the teams discovered in those depths would rewrite Mountain Ridge's history and force America to confront how thoroughly evil can disguise itself as respectability. The tunnel system extended far beyond initial estimates. Engineers mapped 17 separate chambers spread across 3 levels, some dating back to the original 1890s mining operations, others carved out specifically as prison cells in later decades. The deepest chamber sat 70 feet below ground, accessible only by crawling through passages so narrow that claustrophobia became an occupational hazard for investigators. In those chambers, they found 12 complete skeletal remains. DNA analysis would eventually match them to missing persons cases spanning from 1952 to 2003. 12 families who'd spent decades in limbo between hope and despair would finally receive answers, though the answers brought no comfort, only the cold certainty of long-ago deaths. But the most disturbing discovery came in what investigators began calling the archive room. Harold Whitmore had kept meticulous records, not just in the ledger Parker had found, but in extensive photo albums, journals, and even audio recordings. It was a comprehensive documentation of his family's multi-generational crimes, preserved with the care of someone who believed he was recording important history. The journals detailed the methodology passed down from father to son. Jeremiah Blackwood had started with simple murder, eliminating competition for valuable mining claims. His son, Marcus Blackwood, refined the technique by discovering that live hostages provided better leverage than dead enemies. Marcus's son, William Blackwood, who'd legally changed the family name to Whitmore to distance themselves from their notorious past, had systematized the operation into a kind of business model. And Harold Whitmore, the current generation, had perfected it into an art form. His journals read like the notes of a scientist conducting experiments. He documented how long children survived in various conditions, how quickly families broke under pressure, which forms of leverage proved most effective. The writing was calm, methodical, devoid of empathy or awareness that he was describing profound evil. In his mind, he was simply managing family assets and protecting family interests. The photograph collection was even worse. Harold had attended vigils for his own victims, had comforted grieving families at funerals while knowing exactly where their children were, had donated to search efforts and reward funds, playing the role of concerned citizen while the missing suffered beneath his property. The photos showed him at these events, his face arranged in appropriate expressions of sympathy, his hand on shoulders of parents whose lives he'd destroyed. One photo stopped Parker cold. It was from Emily's memorial service in 1990. 13-year-old James Parker stood beside his sobbing mother, his face frozen in grief. And there, 3 feet away, his hand extended in a gesture of comfort, was Harold Whitmore. Parker remembered that moment, the mayor telling him to be strong, to honor Emily's memory, to know that some tragedies couldn't be prevented, all while Emily lived in darkness 30 feet below the cemetery where they'd buried someone else's child. Parker stared at that photograph for 20 minutes before he could move. The FBI agent beside him finally said, "He was mocking you, all of you. This was a game to him." The audio recordings were the final atrocity. Harold had taped some of his visits to the prisoners, capturing their pleas, their despair, their gradual psychological deterioration. He'd listen to the recordings later, like someone reviewing notes from a business meeting. Investigators found hours of tape, carefully labeled and dated. One recording featured Emily from approximately 1998, when she would have been 9 years old. Her voice was childish still, not yet broken by puberty and trauma. "Please let me go. My brother's probably so sad. My mom's probably crying. I'll be good, I promise. I won't tell anyone. Please. I just want to go home." Harold's voice responded, calm and almost gentle. "This is your home now, Emily. The sooner you accept that, the easier it will be. Your family thinks you're dead. They buried you. They've moved on. No one's looking for you anymore. Jimmy wouldn't stop looking. He promised. He said always. Your Jimmy gave up years ago. Sweetheart, you're forgotten." Parker listened to this recording in the FBI command center, his hands gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles went white. Other agents watched him with concern, ready to intervene if he broke. But Parker didn't break. He simply stood, walked out into the snow, and screamed until his voice gave out. The investigation into Harold Whitmore's co-conspirators revealed a network that shocked even hardened federal agents. Harold hadn't operated alone. His cousins, Edward and Thomas Whitmore, had run similar operations in adjacent counties. A family friend who served as county coroner had falsified death certificates and dental records to make misidentifications possible. A lawyer had helped falsify property documents. Even a few local police officers had accepted payments to direct investigations away from Blackwood-owned properties. Mountain Ridge hadn't just harbored one monster. It had been systematically corrupted by a criminal enterprise that touched every level of civic life. The mayor, the coroner, the lawyer. The police, the institutions meant to protect, had been compromised or complicit. The town's self-image shattered. People who'd lived there for generations began questioning everything. Had their grandparents known? Had the land their house stood on been stolen from someone? Were they living comfortable lives built on buried atrocities? Some couldn't handle it. Within 2 weeks of the discovery, 3 longtime residents died by suicide, leaving notes expressing shame and guilt for not seeing, not questioning, not caring enough to look beneath the surface. But Emily Carter's recovery brought something unexpected amid the horror, a kind of miracle that medical science couldn't fully explain. Sarah Miller's cancer, which had been aggressively metastatic and terminal, suddenly went into remission. Scans taken a week after Ryan's rescue showed the tumors had shrunk by 70%. Subsequent tests showed no active cancer cells. Her oncologist had no explanation. This kind of spontaneous remission is extraordinarily rare. We can't predict it, can't explain it, can't replicate it. It just sometimes happens. Sarah knew why, though she couldn't prove it scientifically. When Ryan was missing, when she'd believed him lost forever, her body had been preparing to die. She'd been holding on only long enough to know his fate. But when he came home, when she held him again to her, Something in her cellular structure decided to fight. Stress had been killing her. Relief jolt and hope became medicine stronger than any drug. They say the will to live matters, she told her doctor. I have a reason to live now. Ryan needs his mother. That's all the explanation I need. Emily Carter's rehabilitation began in a specialized facility equipped to handle her unique trauma. 30 years of captivity had done profound damage, physical, psychological, neurological. She couldn't walk initially. Her muscles had atrophied too severely. She was blind in one eye from untreated infection. Her bones were brittle from vitamin D deficiency. She'd lost most of her teeth. But the psychological damage ran deeper. Emily had been 6 when taken, still forming her personality and understanding of the world. 30 years in captivity had been her entire adult life. She knew nothing of technology, culture, history from the past 3 decades. The Soviet Union still existed in her mind. She remembered a world without internet, cell phones, or social media. Therapists worked with her gently, helping her process not just the trauma, but the profound disorientation of emerging into a world that had moved on without her. She was 45 years old, but in many ways still 6. Still that little girl waiting for her brother to come back. Parker visited every day, sometimes just sitting beside her bed, holding her hand, weeping quietly. They didn't always talk. Sometimes Emily would just stare at him, touching his face, confirming he was real. I used to talk to you, she told him one afternoon, her voice still raspy and weak. In my head, I'd tell you about my day, about what I was thinking. It made me feel less alone. I talked to you, too, Parker confessed. At your grave, I'd tell you I was sorry, that I failed you. You didn't fail me, Jimmy. You found me. You never stopped being my brother. Her children, Hope and Light, presented even more complex challenges. They'd been born in captivity, had never known anything else. The outside world wasn't a homecoming for them. It was an alien planet. They were terrified of the sky's vastness, of the sun's brightness, of the constant sensory input that normal people filtered automatically. Hope, at 12, covered her ears constantly, overwhelmed by sounds, traffic, voices, music, wind. She'd been born into silence broken only by whispers and the drip of water. The cacophony of normal life was torture. Light, at 14, struggled with the concept of other people. He'd known only 3 humans in his life: his mother, his sister, and Harold Whitmore. The idea that billions of people existed, that the world was vast and full of strangers, caused panic attacks that left him hyperventilating. Therapists specialized in severe trauma worked with them for hours daily, gradually introducing them to reality in manageable doses. They started with 15 minutes of sunlight, then 30, slowly building tolerance. They practiced walking in a hallway before attempting outdoor excursions. They learned basic social interaction by watching videos before meeting new people. Parker legally adopted both children, making himself their guardian and giving them his last name, Hope Carter Parker and Light Carter Parker. They'd been born from violence, but they'd be raised in love. That was his promise to Emily and to himself. Ryan Miller, meanwhile, struggled with his own processing. He'd been captive for only 4 days, but those 4 days had taught him things no 10-year-old should learn: that the world contained real monsters, that people you trusted could betray you, that your own father might value money more than your life. He had nightmares every night, waking up screaming, convinced he was still in that chamber. Luna remained his constant companion, sleeping beside his bed, her presence the only thing that could calm him when the night terrors hit. The dog seemed to understand his trauma in ways humans couldn't. Perhaps because she'd survived something similar herself. One night, Ryan asked his mother the question that haunted him. Did Dad ever love us? Was it all fake? Sarah had been dreading this conversation. She chose honesty over comfort. Your father loves you, Ryan, but love isn't always enough. Sometimes people love you and still fail you. Sometimes they make terrible choices even when they care. What your father did was wrong. Love doesn't excuse it, but it was real, even if it wasn't strong enough to make him do the right thing. Do I have to forgive him? No. Forgiveness is a gift, not an obligation. Maybe someday you'll want to, or maybe you won't. Either way is okay. You get to decide how you feel about what he did. Ryan thought about this for a long time. I think I want to forgive him someday. Not now, but someday. Because Luna taught me something. What's that? That love is about showing up. Dad didn't show up when I needed him, but Luna did, Mom did, Officer Parker did. So I know what real love looks like now. And when I have kids, I'll show up for them every time, no matter what. Sarah held her son and cried, devastated by his loss of innocence, but proud of his emerging wisdom. The legal proceedings began in late winter. Harold Whitmore faced 23 counts of kidnapping, 14 counts of murder, multiple counts of rape, and dozens of other charges. His cousins faced similar indictments. The corrupt coroner, the complicit lawyer, the paid-off police officers all faced justice. Harold pleaded not guilty, claiming he was simply preserving his family's legacy and protecting their rightful property. His defense attorney tried to argue diminished capacity, suggesting Harold had been indoctrinated from childhood into viewing his actions as normal family business. The jury needed 4 hours to convict on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 14 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. Harold showed no emotion as the sentence was read. His face as calm as if he were hearing a weather report. But as marshals led him away, he looked directly at Officer Parker, sitting in the gallery, and smiled. Parker lunged toward him. FBI agents caught him before he reached Harold, holding him back as he shouted, "You took 30 years from her. 30 years? She was 6 years old." Harold's smile never wavered, and I'd do it again. Every choice I made protected my family's interests. That's what men do. Officer Parker, we protect what's ours. He disappeared into federal custody, destined to die in a maximum security prison. Probably within a year. Child predators didn't survive long in general population, and Harold Whitmore was the worst kind. The town of Mountain Ridge began the painful process of reckoning with its past. The Blackwood name was stripped from every public building. The elementary school became Pine Ridge Elementary. The hospital became Mountain Ridge Memorial. The community center became Hope House, dedicated to supporting families of missing persons. The mine entrance was permanently sealed, but not before a memorial was constructed. 23 white stone markers, one for each identified victim, arranged in a circle around a central sculpture, a child's hand and reaching upward toward light. The inscription read, "To those who suffered in Slint's, your voices are heard now. You will not be forgotten." Families of the dead held private ceremonies, finally able to bury their loved ones properly, finally able to grieve with certainty rather than ambiguous hope. Jessica Morrison's mother, now 78 years old, stood at her daughter's actual grave for the first time in 36 years. "I can finally say goodbye," she whispered. "I can finally rest." But Emily Carter's survival meant something else. It meant hope. If she'd survived 30 years, might others have survived too? The FBI expanded their search, investigating other Blackwood properties, other abandoned mines, other sealed chambers. They found 2 more victims alive, a man taken at age 19, now 43, and a woman taken at age 16, now 32. Each rescue brought fresh horror and fresh hope intertwined. The survivors had to learn to live again, to remember who they'd been before captivity erased their identities. Some would make it. Some would remain permanently broken, but they were alive, and that counted for something. On a cold February evening, 6 weeks after Ryan's rescue, Officer James Parker sat in Emily's hospital room while she worked through her physical therapy exercises. She could walk now, with assistance, could speak in full sentences, though her voice remained damaged, could eat solid food and shower independently. Hope and Light sat nearby, reading books, real books with pictures of the outside world, slowly expanding their understanding of reality. Parker watched them and felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years. Peace, not happiness. The damage was too great for simple happiness. But peace, the end of wondering, the end of guilty unknowing. "Jimmy," Emily said quietly, "stop crying. You're going to dehydrate yourself." He laughed through his tears. "I'm just glad you're here." "Me too. Finally." And Luna lay at Ryan's feet in his hospital room across town, her head on his lap, her eyes half closed. The boy stroked her ears, reading aloud from a book about dog heroes throughout history. "Listen to this. Luna, in 1925, a dog named Balto led a sled team 500 miles through a blizzard to deliver medicine. He saved a whole town, just like you saved me." Luna's tail thumped once against the floor. "I think you're the best hero dog ever. Better than Balto. Better than all of them." The dog looked up at him with those knowing brown eyes, and Ryan could have sworn she understood every word. Sarah Miller, cancer-free and growing stronger every day, watched from the doorway, her son alive, her health restored, her ex-husband in jail where he belonged, her future uncertain but possible. She'd survived the worst thing a parent could face. Everything after this would be easier by comparison. Mountain Ridge would never be the same. The innocence was gone, the pretense shattered. But in its place was something more valuable: truth. Painful, ugly, devastating truth, and from truth, healing could begin, not quickly, not easily, but genuinely. The darkness had been exposed. Now the long work of choosing light could finally start. 6 months after Ryan Miller's rescue, Mountain Ridge had transformed into something unrecognizable from the quiet town it had pretended to be. The scars remained visible, empty storefronts where businesses had closed after their owners were implicated in the cover-up. New street names where old ones had been stripped away. A collective wariness in how neighbors regarded each other. But there were signs of healing, too. Small, fragile, hard-won signs. Harold Whitmore died in prison in April, 3 months into his sentence. Official cause was listed as cardiac arrest, but prison sources whispered about vigilante justice from inmates who'd learned what he'd done. No investigation followed. No one mourned. His body went unclaimed until Parker finally arranged a burial in an unmarked grave outside town limits. Even dead, Harold Whitmore wouldn't rest in Mountain Ridge soil. The trial of his accomplices continued through spring. Edward and Thomas Whitmore received life sentences. The corrupt coroner hanged himself in his cell before trial. The lawyer cooperated with prosecutors and received a reduced sentence of 20 years. 3 police officers lost their badges and pensions, 2 receiving prison terms, 1 dying of a stroke the day after his conviction. The Blackwood Whitmore estate, seized by federal authorities, was liquidated. $50 million in assets, land, investments. Properties accumulated over 4 generations of crime went into a victim compensation fund. The money could never restore what had been stolen, but it meant the survivors wouldn't face poverty along with trauma. Emily Carter moved slowly back into the world, one painful step at a time. By March, she could walk unaided for short distances. By April, she could tolerate an hour of sunlight. By May, she'd spoken her first words to someone other than family. A therapist who'd worked with genocide survivors and understood trauma that broke conventional psychological frameworks. Her children progressed differently. Hope proved adaptable in ways that surprised everyone. The 12-year-old was hungry for knowledge, devouring books, watching documentaries, asking endless questions about how the world worked. She drew constantly pictures of the sky, of animals, of people, as if trying to capture and understand everything she'd missed. Light struggled more. The 14-year-old boy had been old enough in captivity to develop more complex trauma responses. He had violent nightmares. He couldn't tolerate being touched. He spoke rarely and trusted no one except his mother and sister. But Parker worked with him patiently, teaching him woodworking in a small workshop behind the house, giving him ways to create something with his hands, to control at least one small part of his environment. By June, Light carved his first independent project, a wooden dog, recognizable as Luna despite the crude craftsmanship. He gave it to Parker without words, but the gesture said everything. Trust was beginning, tentative as a sapling in rocky soil. Parker officially retired from the police force in March, dedicating himself full-time to Emily and the children. The town held a ceremony honoring his decades of service, but he couldn't enjoy the accolades. Every speech praising his dedication reminded him of 30 years he'd been searching in the wrong places, accepting lies as truth, but Emily wouldn't let him drown in guilt. One evening in April, as they sat on the porch of his house, watching sunset paint the mountains gold, she said what she'd been holding back for weeks. "Jimmy, you have to stop punishing yourself. You were 13 when I was taken, a child. You couldn't have saved me then. I should have questioned the body they found. I should have demanded better evidence. You should have been allowed to be a kid. This wasn't your failure. It was the failure of every adult who was supposed to protect us both." The police who accepted false evidence, the coroner who lied, the politicians who looked the other way, you're not responsible for their corruption. But I gave up searching. You mourned your sister, like any child would. That's not giving up. That's grieving what you believed was true. She took his hand. You found me in the end. That's what matters. You never really stopped looking. It's why you became a cop, why you dedicated your life to search and rescue. You were looking for me in every missing person you found. Parker wept. Emily held him while he released 30 years of accumulated grief, guilt, and relief. When he finally quieted, she said, "Now we both get to heal together." Ryan Miller's recovery followed a different trajectory. The physical healing came quickly. He was young and resilient, and 4 days of captivity hadn't permanently damaged his body. But the psychological wounds ran deep. He had nightmares 3 or 4 times a week. He couldn't tolerate closed doors or dark rooms. He startled at sudden noises. He struggled to trust adults, especially men. Luna remained his anchor. The German shepherd never left his side, sleeping beside his bed, walking him to therapy appointments, sitting quietly while he talked through his trauma with a child psychologist. The bond between boy and dog transcended normal pet relationships. They'd saved each other, Luna by finding him, Ryan by giving her a purpose beyond her own survival. By summer, Ryan had progressed enough to attend a day program with other traumatized children. He met a girl his age who'd survived a house fire that killed her parents, a boy who'd witnessed his father's murder, a teenager who'd escaped human trafficking. They formed a small community of the wounded, learning together that trauma didn't make them broken, just human. One afternoon in July, Ryan came home and asked his mother something that had been building for months. "Can I see Dad?" Sarah had been expecting this. Robert Miller remained in minimum security federal prison, serving a 2-year sentence for obstruction of justice. He'd written letters to Ryan every week, letters Sarah had kept without showing her son, waiting for Ryan to be ready. "Are you sure you want to?" "I think so. I'm not ready to forgive him, but I want to understand why. I want to hear him explain." They arranged a visit for the following week. Parker drove them to the prison, waiting outside while Ryan went in with Sarah. Robert looked thinner, grayer, older than his 45 years. He stood when they entered the visiting room, his hands shaking, his eyes wet. "Ryan, God, you've grown." Ryan sat across from him, his face carefully neutral. Sarah stayed silent, letting her son lead. "Why?" Ryan asked simply. Robert had prepared a speech, but it dissolved in the face of his son's direct question. "I was drowning. Your mother was dying. We owed more money than I could ever repay. I was desperate and terrified, and when Whitmore offered a solution, I wanted to believe it would work. I convinced myself I was saving our family, but really I was just saving myself from having to feel powerless." He swallowed hard. "There's no excuse. I chose wrong. I chose money over your safety. I chose my comfort over your life. You knew where I was the whole time. Yes. You let everyone search. You let Officer Parker almost give up on life. You let Mom nearly die. Yes. And I'll carry that for the rest of my life." Ryan studied his father for a long moment. Good. You should carry it, because I am going to carry what you did to me for the rest of mine. He stood. I came here to see if you were sorry. You are. That's enough for now. Maybe in a few years I'll be ready to talk again. Maybe not. But I needed to know you understood what you did. I understand, son. I promise you, I understand. Ryan left without looking back. In the car, he cried for 20 minutes while Sarah held him. Then he dried his eyes and said, I think that helped. I think I can start letting it go now. Sarah Miller had her own healing journey. The cancer remained in remission through spring and summer, defying every statistical prediction. She gained weight. Her hair grew back short and silvery gray now instead of the brown she'd had before. She looked different, felt different, was different. Cancer and trauma had transformed her at a cellular level. She returned to teaching in April, starting part-time, working her way back to full days by June. The third graders welcomed her with handmade cards and fierce hugs. She cried reading their messages, We missed you, Mrs. Miller, and we're glad you didn't die, and thank you for coming back. In May, she did something she'd been contemplating for weeks. She drove to the prison and requested a visit with Robert. He looked shocked when she was brought to the visiting room. Sarah, I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again. I don't want to. I need to. She sat across from him, her posture straight, her voice clear. I came to tell you that I forgive you. Robert's face crumpled. How? After what I forgive you, because holding hatred is killing me as surely as the cancer was. I forgive you because Ryan needs to see that forgiveness is possible even when forgiveness seems impossible. I forgive you because we were both drowning in different ways, and you grabbed for the wrong life preserver. She leaned forward. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. We're still getting divorced. You're still paying for what you did, and you're not getting your family back. Forgiveness just means I'm choosing not to let your betrayal poison the rest of my life. I understand, and thank you. That's more grace than I deserve. Yes, it is. She left and never visited again. The divorce finalized in June. Sarah kept the house, full custody of Ryan, and a clean break from the man who'd loved her but not enough. Luna's role in the rescue made her a national hero by summer. News programs ran features. A publishing house offered a six-figure advance for a book about her story. Hollywood producers inquired about movie rights. But Parker declined everything that would turn Luna into a spectacle. She wasn't a commodity. She was a member of his family. In July, however, he agreed to one thing, allowing Luna to receive the National Hero Dog Award in Washington, D.C. Ryan accompanied her to the ceremony, the boy and dog walking onto the stage together while hundreds of people stood and applauded. The president presented Luna with a medal on a blue ribbon, scratching her ears while cameras flashed. Luna represents the best of what loyalty means. The president said, she never gave up when humans might have. She trusted her instincts when logic said stop. She saved not just one boy, but exposed decades of hidden crimes. She's a reminder that heroism comes in many forms, and sometimes the truest hearts beat beneath fur. Luna wagged her tail, utterly unconcerned with the honor for her. Finding Ryan hadn't been heroism, it had been love. The same force that makes a dog wait by the door for an owner who will never return. The same force that makes them search through rubble after earthquakes. The same force that transcends language, species, and reason. After the ceremony, Parker made a decision. Luna had earned retirement. She was 5 years old now, past her prime for active duty, even if he'd still been on the force. She deserved a quiet life, a warm home, and the knowledge that her work was done. But Ryan needed her more than Parker did. So arrangements were made. In August, Luna officially moved into the Miller household, becoming Ryan's dog instead of Parker's. The transition was seamless. Luna had already chosen Ryan months ago. The paperwork just made it official. The night Luna moved in permanently, Ryan lay in bed with her beside him, his arm over her shoulders. "You saved my life, girl. Now I'm going to make sure your life is good." "Deal." Luna licked his face, which was apparently agreement enough. Mountain Ridge established the Hope Haven Center in June, funded by the Blackwood Whitmore Victim Compensation Money. The center provided free legal services to families of missing persons, free therapy for trauma survivors, and free advocacy for victims of crime. Sarah Miller served on the board of directors. Emily Carter, still fragile but growing stronger, agreed to be a consultant, sharing her experience to help others navigate similar trauma. Robert Miller, scheduled for release in 8 months, sent a letter to Hope Haven offering his legal services pro bono upon his release. The board debated for 3 weeks before accepting. His crimes were public, his shame was permanent, but his expertise was valuable, and forcing him to use it in service of victims seemed appropriate justice. By September, Hope and Light had progressed enough to attempt their first outdoor excursion beyond hospital grounds. Parker took them to a meadow in the mountains, far from town, where they could experience nature without crowds. Hope ran in circles, laughing at the feeling of grass beneath her bare feet, while Light stood motionless for 20 minutes, staring at the horizon where mountains met sky. "It's so big," he whispered. "I didn't think it would be this big." "The world is enormous," Parker told him, "and all of it is yours to explore now. No walls, no limits, just possibility." Light began to cry, not from fear but from overwhelming relief. He'd spent 14 years believing the chamber was the entire universe. Now he understood that the universe had no walls at all. In October, the town held a memorial service at the site where the mine had been sealed. 23 families attended, representing the 23 confirmed victims. They released white doves, one for each lost soul, and planted 23 oak saplings that would grow into a grove, a living monument to lives that ended too soon. Emily attended with Parker, Hope, and Light. When it was her turn to plant a tree, she chose to plant it for herself, for the Emily who'd been taken at 6 and lost 30 years. That Emily was dead. This Emily, scarred and damaged, but alive, was someone new. "I'm planting this for the little girl I was," she said, "so she can rest, so I can move forward." The tree went into the earth, roots finding purchase in soil that had covered so much darkness. Maybe something beautiful could grow here after all. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of amber and crimson, Officer James Parker stood on his porch one evening, watching the sunset with a cup of coffee in his hands. Luna lay at his feet. She still visited regularly, though she belonged to Ryan now. Emily and her children were inside, preparing dinner, their voices and laughter drifting through the open window. For 30 years, Parker had carried guilt like a stone in his chest, had believed himself a failure, a man who'd let evil win. But he understood now. Evil had won many battles, but it hadn't won the war. Emily was alive. Ryan was healing. Hope and light were learning what it meant to be free. Luna had transformed trauma into purpose. Justice had been served. Truth had been exposed. And healing, slow and painful and imperfect, was happening. It wasn't a happy ending. The damage was too extensive for simple happiness. Emily would never fully recover. Light might struggle his entire life. Ryan would always carry scars. The families of the dead would grieve forever. But it was an ending, nonetheless. The darkness had been named, confronted, and defeated. The survivors were choosing light, and that choice, made daily against the weight of trauma, was the bravest thing Parker had ever witnessed. Luna lifted her head and looked at him, her amber eyes reflecting the sunset. "Good girl," Parker said softly. "You did good, Luna. You saved them all." The dog's tail thumped once against the porch boards. Then she lowered her head back to her paws and closed her eyes, content in the knowledge that her job was done. The darkness had been defeated. Now came the hard, necessary work of learning to live in the light. I have been telling stories for over 50 years, and this one about Luna, Officer Parker, and the Miller family stays with me differently than most. It's not just about crime or rescue. It's about what remains after darkness, the slow, sacred work of healing. We all carry something, don't we? Perhaps it's a choice we regret, a person we couldn't save, a truth we were too afraid to face. Robert Miller made a terrible choice born from desperation. Parker blamed himself for 30 years for something beyond his control. Sarah had to choose between bitterness and peace. Each had to decide whether their past would define their future. But here's what Luna taught us. Loyalty doesn't need reasons. Love doesn't require perfection. And sometimes the most faithful souls come on 4 legs. She showed us that hope isn't about avoiding darkness. It's about refusing to let darkness have the final word. If you take anything from this story, let it be this truth may wound before it heals, but lies keep wounds infected forever. Family isn't just blood, it's who shows up when you need them most. And forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing not to let pain steal your remaining years. What truth have you been avoiding that might set you free? Who in your life has shown you unconditional loyalty when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.